The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, page number 127. On the following day, the first clear sign of danger appeared. Three armed tribesmen approached and asked what the boy and the alchemist were doing there. I am hunting with my falcon, the alchemist answered. We are going to have to search you to see whether you are armed, one of the tribesmen said. The alchemist dismounted slowly and the boy did the same. Why are you carrying money? Asked the tribesman. When he had searched the boy's bag, I needed to get to the pyramids, he said. The tribesman who was searching the alchemist's belongings found a small crystal flask filled with a liquid and a yellow glass egg that was slightly larger than a chicken's egg. What are these things? He asked. That's the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. It is the masterwork of alchemist. Whoever swallows that elixir will never be sick again, and a fragment from that stone turns any metal into gold. The Arabs laughed at him and the alchemist laughed along. They thought his answer was amusing and they allowed the boy and the alchemist to proceed with all of their belongings. Are you crazy? The boy asked the alchemist when they had moved on. What did you do that for? To show you one of life's simple lessons. The alchemist answered, when you possess great treasures within you and try to tell others of them, seldom are you believed. They continued across the desert. With every day that passed, the boy's heart became more and more silent. It no longer wanted to know about things of past or future. It was content simply to contemplate the desert and to drink with the boy from the soul of the world. The boy and his heart had become friends and neither was capable now of betraying the other. When his heart spoke to him, it was to provide a stimulus to the boy and to give him strength because the days of silence there in the desert were wearisome. His heart told the boy what his strongest qualities were, his courage in having given up his sheep and in trying to live out his destiny, and his enthusiasm during the time he had worked at the crystal shop. And his heart told him something else that the boy had never noticed. It told the boy of dangers that had threatened him, but that he had never perceived. His heart said that one time it had hidden the rifle the boy had taken from his father because of the possibility that the boy might wound himself, and it reminded the boy of the day when he had been ill and vomiting out in the fields, after which he had fallen into a deep sleep. There had been two thieves farther ahead who were planning to steal the boy's sheep and murder him, but since the boy had not passed by, they had decided to move on, thinking that he had changed his route. Does a man's heart always help him? The boy asked the alchemist. Mostly just the hearts of those who are trying to realize their destinies, but they do help children, drunkards, and the elderly too. Does that mean that I will never run into danger? It means only that the heart does what it can, the alchemist said. One afternoon, they passed by the encampment of one of the tribes. At each corner of the camp were Arabs garbed in beautiful white robes with arms at the ready. The men were smoking their hookahs and trading stories from the battlefield. No one paid any attention to the two travelers. There's no danger, the boy said when they had moved on past the encampment. The alchemist sounded angry. Trust in your heart, but never forget that you are in the desert. When men are at war with one another, the soul of the world can hear the screams of battle. No one fails to suffer the consequences of everything under the sun. All things are one, the boy thought, and then, as if the desert wanted to demonstrate that the alchemist was right, two horsemen appeared from behind the travelers. You can't go any farther, one of them said. You are in the area where the tribes are at war. I am not going very far, the alchemist answered, looking straight into the eyes of the horseman. They were silent for a moment and then agreed that the boy and the alchemist could move along. The boy watched the exchanged with fascination. You dominated those horsemen with the way you looked at them, he said. Your eyes show the strength of your soul, answered the alchemist. That's true, the boy thought. He had noticed that in the midst of the multitude of armed men back at the encampment, there had been one who stared fixedly at the two. He had been so far away that his face was not even visible, but the boy was certain that he had been looking at them. Finally, when they had crossed the mountain range that extended along the entire horizon, the alchemist said that they were only 2 days from the pyramids. If we are going to go our separate ways soon, the boy said, then teach me about alchemy. You already know about alchemy. It is about penetrating to the soul of the world and discovering the treasure that has been reserved for you. No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about transforming lead into gold. The alchemist fell as silent as the desert and answered the boy only after they had stopped to eat. Everything in the universe evolved, he said, and for wise men, gold is the metal that evolved the furthest. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I just know that the tradition is always right. Men have never understood the words of the wise. So gold, instead of being seen as a symbol of evolution, became the basis for conflict. There are many languages spoken by things, the boy said. There was a time when, for me, a camel's winning was nothing more than winning. Then it became a signal of danger, and finally it became just a winning again. But then he stopped. The alchemist probably already knew all that. I have no two alchemists, the alchemist continued. They looked themselves in their laboratories and tried to evolve as gold had, and they found the philosopher's stone because they understood that when something evolves, everything around that thing evolves as well. Others stumbled upon the stone by accident. They already had the gift and their souls were readier for such things than the souls of others, but they don't count. They are quite rare. And then there were the others who were interested only in gold. They never found the secret. They forgot that lead, copper, and iron have their own destinies to fulfill, and anyone who interferes with the destiny of another thing never will discover his own. The alchemist's words echoed out like a curse. He out, reached over and picked up a shell from the ground. This desert was once a sea, he said. I noticed that, the boy answered. The alchemist told the boy to place the shell over his ear. He had done that many times when he was a child and had heard the sound of the sea. The sea has lived on in this cell because that's its destiny, and it will never cease doing so until the desert is once again covered by water. They mounted their horses and rode out in the direction of pyramids of Egypt. The sun was setting when the boys heard sounded a danger signal. They were surrounded by gigantic dunes, and the boy looked at the alchemist to see whether he had sensed anything, but he appeared to be unaware of any danger. 5 minutes later, the boy saw two horsemen waiting ahead of them. Before he could say anything to the alchemist, the two horsemen had become 10 and then 100, and then they were everywhere in the dunes. They were tribesmen dressed in blue, with black wings surrounding their turban. Their faces were hidden behind blue berets, but only their eyes showing. Even from a distance, their eyes conveyed the strength of their souls, and their eyes spoke of death. The two were taken to a nearby military camp. A soldier shoved the boy and the alchemist into a tent where the chief was holding a meeting with his staff. These are the spies, said one of the men. We are just travelers, alchemist answered. You were seen at the enemy camp 3 days ago, and you were talking with one of the troops there. I am just a man who wanders the desert and knows the stars, said the alchemist. I have no information about troops or about the movement of tribes. I was simply acting as a guide for my friend there. Who is your friend? The chief asked. An alchemist, said the alchemist. He understands the forces of nature and he wants to show you his extraordinary powers. The boy listened quietly and fearfully. What is a foreigner doing here? Asked another of the men. He had brought money to give to your tribe, said the alchemist. Before the boy could say a word, and seizing the boy's bag, the alchemist gave the gold coins to the chief. The Arab accepted them without a word. There was enough there to buy a lot of weapons. What is an alchemist? He asked finally. It's a man who understands nature and the world. If he wanted to, he could destroy this camp just with the force of the wind. The man laughed. They were used to the ravages of war and knew that the wind could not deliver them a fatal blow. Yet each felt his heart beat a bit faster. They were men of the desert and they were fearful of sorcerers. I want to see him do it, said the chief. He needs 3 days, answered the alchemist. He is going to transform himself into the wind, just to demonstrate his power. If he can't do so, we humbly offer you our lives for the honor of your tribe. You can't offer me something that is already mine, the chief said arrogantly, but he granted the travelers 3 days. The boy was shaking with fear, but the alchemist helped him out of the tent. Don't let them see that you are afraid, the alchemist said. They are brave men and they despise coward. But the boy couldn't even speak. He was able to do so only after they had walked through the center of the camp. There was no need to imprison them. The Arabs simply confiscated their horses. So once again, the world had demonstrated its many languages. The desert only moments ago had been endless and free, and now it was an impenetrable wall. You gave them everything I had, the boy said, everything I have saved in my entire life. Well, what good would it be to you if you had to die? The alchemist answered. Your money saved us for 3 days. It's not often that money saves a person's life. But the boy was too frightened to listen to words of wisdom. He had no idea how he was going to transform himself into the wind. He was not an alchemist. The alchemist asked one of the soldiers for some tea and poured some on the boy's wrist. A wave of relief passed over him, and the alchemist muttered some words that the boy didn't understand. Don't give into your fears, said the alchemist in a strangely gentle voice. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. But I have no idea how to turn myself into the wind. If a person is living out his destiny, he knows everything he needs to know. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, the fear of failure. I am not afraid of failing. It's just that I don't know how to turn myself into the wind. Well, you will have to learn. Your life depends on it. But what if I can't? Then you will die in the midst of trying to realizing your destiny. That's a lot better than dying like millions of other people who never even know what their destiny is for. But don't worry, the alchemist continued. Usually the threat of death makes people a lot more aware of their lives. The first day passed. There was a major battle nearby, and a number of wounded were brought back to the camp. The dead soldiers were replaced by others, and life went on. That doesn't change anything, the boy thought. You could have died later on. A soldier said to the body of one of his companions. You could have died after peace had been declared, but in any case, you were going to die. At the end of the day, the boy bent looking for the alchemist who had taken his falcon out into the desert. I still have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, the boy repeated. Remember what I told you. The world is only the visible aspect of God, and that what alchemy does is to bring spiritual perfection into contact with the material plane. What are you doing? Feeding my falcon. I'm not able to turn myself into the wind. We are going to die, the boy said. Why feed your falcon? You are the one who may die, the alchemist said. I already know how to turn myself into the wind. On the second day, the boy climbed to the top of a cliff near the camp. The sentinels allowed him to go. They had already heard about the sorcerers who could turn himself into the wind, and they didn't want to go near him. In any case, the desert was impassable. He spent the entire afternoon of the second day looking out over the desert and listening to his heart. The boy knew the desert sensed his fear. They both spoke the same language. On the third day, the chief met with his officers. He called the alchemist to the meeting and said, "Let's go see the boy who turns himself into a wind." "Let's," the alchemist answered. The boy took them to the cliff where he had been on the previous day. He told them all to be seated. "It's going to take a while," the boy said. "We are in no hurry," the chief answered. "We are men of the desert." The boy looked out at the horizon. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes, rocks, and plants that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. There was the desert that he had wandered for so many months. Despite all that time, he knew only a small part of it. Within that small part, he had found an Englishman caravans, tribal was, and an oasis with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells. "What do you want here today?" the desert asked him. "Didn't you spend enough time looking at me yesterday? Somewhere you are holding the person I love," the boy said. "So when I look out over your sands, I am also looking at her. I want to return to her, and I need your help so that I can turn myself into the wind." "What is love?" the desert asked. "Love is the falcon's flight over your sands, because for him you are a green field from which he always returns with game. He knows your rocks, your dunes, and your mountains, and you are generous to him. The falcon's beak carries bits of myself," the desert said. "For years I care for his game, feeding it with the little water that I have, and then I show him where the game is. And one day, and as I enjoy the fact that his game thrives on my surface, the falcon dives out of the sky and takes away what I have created." "But that's why you created the game in the first place," the boy answered. "To nourish the falcon, and the falcon then nourishes man, and eventually man will nourish your sands, where the game will once again flourish. That's how the bird goes. So is that what love is?" "Yes, that's what love is. It's what makes the game become the falcon become man, and man in his turn the desert. It's what turns lead into gold and makes the gold return to the earth." "I don't understand what you are talking about," the desert said. "But you can at least understand that somewhere in your sand there is a woman waiting for me, and that's why I have to turn myself into the wind." The desert didn't answer him for a few moments. Then it told him, "I will give you my sands to help the wind to blow, but alone I can't do anything. You have to ask for help from the wind." A breeze began to blow. The tribesmen watched the boy from a distance, talking among themselves in a language that the boy couldn't understand. The alchemist smiled. The wind approached the boy and touched his face. It knew of the boy's talk with the desert, because the winds know everything. They blow across the world without a birthplace and with no place to die. "Help me," the boy said. "One day you carried the voice of my loved one to me. Why, who taught you to speak the language of the desert and the wind?" "My heart," the boy answered. "The wind has many names. In that part of the world, it was called the Sivuko, because it brought moisture from the oceans to the east. In the distant land the boy came from, they called it the Lemento, because they believed that it brought with it the sands of the desert and the screams of the moose walls. Perhaps in the places beyond the pastures where his sheep lived, men thought that the wind came from Andalusia. But actually the wind came from no place at all, nor did it go to any place. That's why it was stronger than the desert. Someone might one day plant trees in the desert and even raise sheep there, but never would they harness the wind. "You can't be the wind said. "We are two very different things." "That's not true," the boy said. "I learned the alchemist's secret in my travels. I have inside me the winds, the desert, the oceans, the stars, and everything created in the universe. We were all made by the same hand, and we have the same soul. I want to we, like you, able to reach every corner of the world, across the sea, blow away the sands that cover my treasure and carry the voice of the woman I love. I heard what you were talking about the other day. With the alchemist, the wind said. He said that everything has its own destiny, but people can't turn themselves into the wind. Just teach me to be the wind for a few moments, the boy said, so you and I can talk about the limitless possibilities of man and the winds. The wind's curiosity was aroused, something that had never happened before. It wanted to talk about those things, but it didn't know how to turn a man into the wind. And look how many things the winds already knew how to do. It created deserts, sank ships, felled entire forests, and blew through cities filled with music and strange noises. It felt that it had no limits. Yet here was a boy saying that there were other things the wind should be able to do. This is what we call love, the boy said, seeing that the wind was close to granting what he requested. When you are loved, you can do anything in creation. When you are loved, there's no need at all to understand what's happening, because everything happens within you, and even men can turn themselves into the wind, as long as the wind helps, of course. The wind was a proud being, and it was becoming irritated with what the boy was saying. It commenced to blow harder, raising the desert sands, but finally it had to recognize that even making its way around the world, it didn't know how to turn a man into the wind, and it knew nothing about love. In my travels around the world, I have often seen people speaking of love and looking toward the heavens. The wind said, furious at having to acknowledge its own limitations. Maybe it's better to ask heaven. Well, then help me to do that. The boy said, fill this place with a sandstorm so strong that it blots out the sun. Then I can look to heaven without blinding myself. So the wind blew with all its strength, and the sky was filled with sand. The sun was turned into a golden disk. At the camp, it was difficult to see anything. The men of the desert were already familiar with that wind. They called it the Simum, and it was worse than a storm at sea. Their horses cried out, and all their weapons were filled with sand. On the heights, one of the commanders turned to the chief and said, maybe we had better end this. They could barely see the boy. Their faces were covered with the blue cloths, and their eyes showed fear. Let's stop this, another commander said. I want to see the greatness of Allah. The chief said with respect, I want to see how a man turns himself into the wind. But he made a mental note of the names of the two men who had expressed their fear. As soon as the wind stopped, he was going to remove them from their commands, because two men of desert are not afraid. The wind told me that you know about love, the boy said to the sun. If you know about love, you must also know about the soul of the world, because it's made of love. From where I am, the sun said, I can see the soul of the world. It communicates with my soul, and together we cause the plants to grow and seek out shade from where I am. And I am a long way from the earth. I learned how to love. I know that if I came even a little bit closer to the earth, everything there would die and the soul of the world would no longer exist. So we contemplate each other and we want each other, and I give it life and warmth, and it gives me my reason for living. So you know about love, the boy said, and I know the soul of the world, because we have talked at great length to each other during this endless trip through the universe. It tells me that its greatest problem is that up until now, only the minerals and vegetables understand that all things are one, that there's no need for iron to be the same as copper, or copper the same as gold. Each performs its own exact function as a unique being, and everything would be a symphony of peace if the hand that wrote all this had stopped on the fifth day of the creation. But there was a sixth day, the sun went on. Thank you very much for listening. This is page number 127 to 142. The Alchemist. Page number 143. You are wise because you observe everything from a distance, the boy said. But you don't know about love. If there had not been a sixth day, man would not exist. Copper would always be just copper, and reed just reed, it's true. But one day that destiny will be realized. So each thing has to transform itself into something and to acquire a new destiny until someday the soul of the world becomes one thing only. The sun thought about that and decided to shine more brightly. The wind, which was enjoying the conversation, started to blow with greater force, so that the sun would not blind the boy. This is why alchemy exists, the boy said, so that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Read will play its role until the world has no further need for the reed, and then reed will have to turn itself into gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. Well, why did you say that I don't know about love? The sun asked the boy. Because it's not love to be static like the desert, nor is it love to roam the world like the wind. And it's not love to see everything from a distance like you do. Love is the force that transforms and improves the soul of the world. When I first reached through to it, I thought the soul of the world was perfect. But later, I could see that it was like other aspects of creation and has had its own passions and powers. It is we who nourish the soul of the world, and the world we live in will be either better or worse, depending on whether we become better or worse. And that's where the power of love comes in, because when we love, we always strive to become better than we are. So what do you want of them? What of me? The sun asked. I want you to help me turn myself into the wind. The boy answered. Nature knows me as the wisest being in creation. The sun said, but I don't know how to turn you into the wind. Then whom should I ask? The sun thought for a minute. The wind was listening closely and wanted to tell every corner of the world that the sun's wisdom had its limitations, that it was unable to deal with this boy who spoke the language of the world. Speak to the hand that wrote all, said the sun. The wind screamed with delight and blew harder than ever. The tents were being blown from their ties to the earth, and the animals were being freed from their tethers. On the cliff, the men crushed at each other as they sought to keep from being blown away. The boy turned to the hand that wrote all. As he did so, he sensed that the universe had fallen silent, and he decided not to speak. A current of love rushed from his heart, and the boy began to pray. It was a prayer that he had never said before, because it was a prayer without words or peace. His prayer didn't give thanks for his sheep having found new pastures. It didn't ask that the boy be able to sell more crystal, and it didn't beseech that the woman he had met continue to await his return. In the silence, the boy understood that the desert, the wind, and the sun were also trying to understand the signs written by the hand, and were seeking to follow their paths and to understand what had been written on a single emerald. He saw that omens were scattered throughout the earth and in space, and that there was no reason or significance attached to their appearance. He could see that not the deserts, nor the winds, nor the sun, nor people knew why they had been created, but that the hand had a reason for all of this, and that only the hand could perform miracles, or transform the sea into a desert, or a man into the wind, because only the hand understood that it was a larger design that had moved the universe to the point at which 6 days of creation had evolved into a masterwork. The boy reached through to the soul of the bird and saw that it was a part of the soul of God. And he saw that soul of God was his own soul, and that he, a boy, could perform miracles. The Simeon grew that day as it had never grown before. For generations thereafter, the Arabs recounted the legend of a boy who had turned himself into the wind, almost destroying a military camp in defiance of the most powerful chief in the desert. When the simum ceased to blow, everyone looked to the place where the boy had been, but he was no longer there. He was standing next to a sand-covered sentinels on the far side of the camp. The men were terrified at his sorcery, but there were two people who were smiling: the alchemist, because he had found his perfect disciple, and the chief, because that disciple had understood the glory of God. The following day, the general bade the boy and the alchemist farewell, and provided them with an escort party to accompany them as far as they chose. They rode for the entire day. Toward the end of the afternoon, they came upon a Coptic monastery. The alchemist dismounted and told the escort they could return to the camp. From here on, you will be alone, the alchemist said. You are only 3 hours from the pyramid. Thank you, said the boy. You taught me the language of the world. I only invoked what you already knew. The alchemist knocked on the gate of the monastery. A monk dressed in black came to the gates. They spoke for a few minutes in the Coptic tongue, and the alchemist bade the boy enter. I asked him to let me use the kitchen for a while. The alchemist smiled. They went to the kitchen at the back of the monastery. The alchemist lighted the fire, and monk brought him some reed, which the alchemist placed in an iron pan. When the reed had become liquid, the alchemist took from his pouch the strange yellow egg. He scraped from it a silver as thin as a hair, wrapped it in wax, and added it to the pan in which the reed had melted. The mixture took on a reddish color, almost the color of blood. The alchemist removed the pan from the fire and set it aside to cool. As he did so, he talked with the monk about the tribal vows. I think they are going to last for a long day, he said to the monk. The monk was irritated. The caravans had been stopped at Giza for some time, waiting for the wars to end, but God's will be done, the monk said. Exactly, answered the alchemist. When the pan had cooled, the monk and the boy looked at it. Desert. The reed had dried into the shape of the pan, but it was no longer reed, it was gold. Will I learn to do that someday? The boy asked. This was my destiny, not yours, the alchemist answered, but I wanted to show you that it was possible. They returned to the gates of the monastery. There the alchemist separated the disc into 4 parts. This is for you, he said, holding out of the parts out to the monk. It's for your generosity to the pilgrims. But this payment goes well beyond my generosity, the monk responded. Don't say that again. Life might be listening and give you rest the next time. The alchemist turned to the boy. This is for you, to make up for what you gave to the jungle. The boy was about to say that it was much more than he had given the general, but he kept quiet because he had heard what the alchemist said to the monk. And this is for me, and said the alchemist, keeping one of the parts, because I have to return to the desert where there are tribal vows. He took the 4th part and handed it to the monk. This is for the boy if he ever needs it. But I am going in search of my treasure, the boy said. I am very close to it now, and I am certain you will find it. The alchemist said, then why this? Because you have already lost your savings twice, once to the thief and once to the general. I am an old superstitious Arab, and I believe in our proverbs. There's one that says, everything that happens once can never happen again. But everything that happens twice will surely happen in a 3rd time. They mounted their horses. I want to tell you a story about dreams, said the alchemist. The boy brought his horse closer. In ancient Rome, at the time of Emperor Tiberius, there lived a good man who had 2 sons. One was in the military and had been sent to the most distant regions of the empire. The other son was a poet and delighted all of Rome with his beautiful verses. One night the father had a dream. An angel appeared to him and told him that the words of one of his sons would be learned and repeated throughout the world for all generations to come. The father woke from his dream, grateful and crying, because life was generous and had revealed to him something any father would be proud to know. Shortly thereafter, the father died as he tried to save a child who was about to be crushed by the wheels of a chariot. Since he had lived his entire life in a manner that was correct and fair, he went directly to heaven, where he met the angel that had appeared in his dream. "You were always a good man," the angel said to him. "You lived your life in a loving way and died with dignity. I can now grant you any wish you desire." "Life was good to me," the man said. "When you appeared in my dream, I felt that all my efforts had been rewarded, because my son's poems will be read by man for generations to come. I don't want anything for myself, but any father would be proud of the fame achieved by one whom he had cared for as a child and educated as he grew up. Sometimes in the distant future, I would like to see my son's world." The angel touched the man's shoulder, and they were both projected far into the future. They were in an immense setting, surrounded by thousands of pupils speaking a strange language. The man wept with happiness. "I knew that my son's poems were immortal," he said to the angel through his tears. "Can you please tell me which of my son's poems these pupils are repeating?" The angel came closer to the man and with tenderness led him to a bench nearby, where they sat down. "The verses of your son, who was a poet, were very popular in Rome," the angel said. "Everyone loved them and enjoyed them. But when the reign of Tiberius ended, his poems were forgotten. The words you are hearing now are those of your son in the military." The man looked at the angel in surprise. "Your son went to serve at a distant place and became a centurion. He was just and good. One afternoon, one of his servants fell ill, and it appeared that he would die. Your son had heard of a rabbi who was able to cure illnesses, and he rode out for days and days in search of this man. Along the way, he learned that the man he was seeking was the Son of God. He met others who had been cured by him, and they instructed your son in the man's teaching. And so, despite the fact that he was a Roman centurion, he converted to their faith. Shortly thereafter, he reached the place where the man he was looking for was visiting. He told the man that one of his servants was gravely ill, and the rabbi made ready to go to his house with him. But the centurion was a man of faith, and looking into the eyes of Rabbi, he knew that he was surely in the presence of the Son of God. "And this is what your son said," the angel told the man. "These are the words he said to the rabbi at that point, and they have never been forgotten. 'My Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed.'" The alchemist said, "No matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't know it." The boy smiled. He had never imagined that questions about life would be of such importance to a shepherd. "Goodbye," the alchemist said. "Goodbye," said the boy. The boy rode along through the desert for several hours, listening avidly to what his heart had to say. It was his heart that would tell him where his treasure was hidden. "Where your treasure is, there also will be your heart," the alchemist had told him. But his heart was speaking of other things. With pride, it told the story of a shepherd who had left his flock to follow a dream he had on 2 different occasions. It told of destiny and of many men who had wandered in search of distant lands or beautiful women confronting the people of their times with their preconceived notions. It spoke of journeys, discoveries, books, and changes. As he was about to climb yet another dune, his heart whispered, "Be aware of the place where you are brought to tears. That's where I am, and that's where your treasure is." The boy climbed the dune slowly. A full moon rose again in the starry sky. It had been a month since he had set forth from the oasis. The moonlight cast shadows through the dunes, creating the appearance of a rolling sea. It reminded the boy of the day when that horse had reared in the desert, and he had come to know the alchemist. And the moon fell on the desert silence, and on a man's journey in search of treasure. When he reached the top of the dune, his heart leaped. There, illuminated by the light of the moon and the brightness of the desert, stood the solemn and majestic pyramids of Egypt. The boy fell to his knees and wept. He thanked God for making him believe in his destiny and for leading him to meet a king, a merchant, an Englishman, an alchemist, and above all, for his sake, having met a woman of the desert who had told him that love would never keep a man from his destiny. If he wanted to, he could now return to the oasis, go back to Fatima, and live his life as a simple shepherd. After all, the alchemist continued to live in the desert. Even though he understood the language of the world and knew how to transform reed into gold, he didn't need to demonstrate his science and art to anyone. The boy told himself that on the way towards realizing his own destiny, he had learned all he needed to know and had experienced everything he might have dreamed of. But here he was, at the point of finding his treasure, and he reminded himself that no project is completed until its objective has been achieved. The boy looked at the sands around him and saw that where his tears had fallen, a scarab beetle was scuttling through the sand. During his time in the desert, he had learned that in Egypt the scarab beetles are a symbol of God. Another omen. The boy began to dig into the dune. As he did so, he thought of what the crystal merchant had once said, that anyone could build a pyramid in his backyard. The boy could see now that he couldn't do so if he placed stone upon stone for the rest of his life. Throughout the night, the boy dug at the place he had chosen, but found nothing. He felt weighted down by the centuries of time since the pyramids had been built, but he didn't stop. He struggled to continue digging as he found the wind, fought the wind, which often blew the sand back into the excavation. His hands were abraded and exhausted, but he listened to his heart. It had told him to dig where his tears fell. As he was attempting to pull out the rock he heard footsteps. Several figures approached him. Their backs were to the moonlight, and the boy could see neither their eyes nor their faces. "What are you doing here?" one of the figures demanded. Because he was terrified, the boy didn't answer. He had found where his treasure was and was frightened at what might happen. "We are refugees from the tribal wars and we need money," the other figure said. "What are you hiding there?" "I am not hiding anything," the boy answered. But one of them seized the boy and yanked him back out of the hole. Another, who was searching the boy's bag, found a piece of gold. "There's gold here," he said. The moon shone on the face of the Arab who had seized him, and in the man's eyes the boy saw death. "He's probably got more gold hidden in the ground." They made the boy continue digging, but he found nothing. As the sun rose, the man began to beat the boy. He was bruised and bleeding. His clothing was torn to shreds, and he felt that death was near. "What good is money to you if you are going to die?" "It's not often that money can save someone's life," the alchemist had said. Finally, the boy screamed at the man, "I am digging for treasure." And although his mouth was bleeding and swollen, he told his attackers that he had twice dreamed of a treasure hidden near the pyramids of Egypt. The man, who appeared to be the leader of the group, spoke to one of the others. "Leave him. He doesn't have anything else. He must have stolen this gold." The boy fell to the sand, nearly unconscious. The leader shook him and said, "We are leaving." But before they left, he came back to the boy and said, "You are not going to die. You will live, and you will learn that a man should not be so stupid." 2 years ago, right here on this spot, I have a recurrent dream too. I dreamed that I should travel to the fields of Spain and look for a ruined church where shepherds and their sheep slept. In my dream, there was a sycamore growing out of the ruins of the sacristy, and I was told that if I dug at the roots of the sycamore, I would find a hidden treasure. But I am not so stupid as to cross an entire desert just because of a recurrent dream. And they disappeared. The boy stood up shakily and looked once more at the pyramid. They seemed to laugh at him, and he laughed back, his heart bursting with joy, because now he knew where his treasure was. The boy reached the small, abandoned church just as night was falling. The sycamore was still there in the sacristy, and the stars could still be seen through the half-destroyed roof. He remembered the time he had been there with his sheep. It had been a peaceful night, except for the dream. Now he was here, not but with a shovel. He sat looking at the sky for a long time. Then he took from his knapsack a bottle of wine and drank some. He remembered the night in the desert when he had sat with the alchemist as they looked at the stars and drank wine together. He thought of the many roads and he had traveled, and of the strange way God had chosen to show him his treasure. If he had not believed in the significance of recurrent dreams, he would not have met the gypsy woman, the knife, the king, the thief, or, well, it's a long list, but the path was written in the omens, and there was no way I could go wrong. He said to himself. He fell asleep. When he awoke, the sun was already high. He began to dig at the base of the sycamore. You old sorcerer, the boy shouted up to the sky. You knew the whole story. You even wrapped a bit of gold at the monastery so I could get back to this church. The monk laughed when he saw me come back in tatters. Couldn't you have saved me from that? No, he heard a voice on the wind say. If I had told you, you wouldn't have seen the pyramids. They are beautiful, aren't they? The boy smiled and continued digging. Half an hour later, his shovel hit something solid. An hour later, he had before him a chest of Spanish gold coins. And there were also precious stones, gold masks adorned with red and white feathers, and stone statues embedded with jewels, the spoils of a conquest that the country had long ago forgotten, and that some conquistador had failed to tell his children about. The boy took out Urim and Thummim from his bag. He had used the two stones only once, one morning when he was at a marketplace. His life and his birth had always provided him with enough omens. He placed Urim and Thummim in the church. They were also part of his new treasure, because they were a reminder of the old king, whom he would never see again. It's true, life really is generous to those who pursue their destiny. And the boy thought. Then he remembered that he had to get to Tarifa, so he could give 1/10 of his treasure to the gypsy woman, as he had promised. Those gypsies are very smart, he thought. Maybe it was because they moved around so much. The wind began to blow again. It was the Levanter, the wind that came from Africa. It didn't bring with it the smell of the desert, nor the threat of Moorish invasion. Instead, it brought the scent of a perfume he knew well, and the touch of a kiss that came from far away, slowly, until it rested on his lips. The boy smiled. It was the first time she had done that. I am coming, Fatima, he said. Thank you very much.